Alright. Today I'm going to be talking about the Gospel of Matthew, the calling of the disciples from the Gospel of Matthew to be specific. We're just using the text of Matthew. Only 5 disciples we can see are clearly called in the Gospel of Matthew. James, John, Simon, Andrew, and Matthew. Now, the question we're going to be looking at is, why did Jesus call these 5 men? What made these men so special that God picked them out for his disciples on earth? Because these men were world changers. They turned the world upside down. From a small group of 120 after Jesus ascended, they turned the world completely upside down. So what is the key ingredient that is needed? What was their skill sets? What is it that set them apart from other men? So we're going to be looking at this. Now the first passage is about 4 fishermen. James and John, who were brothers, and Peter and Andrew, who are also brothers. Jesus went to them and just said, "Come follow me and I'll make you fishers of men." Now he went to fishermen. What is with this? These men, what is it that would make fishermen special? They don't know how to read. They don't know how to write. They don't really know the Old Testament that well. They probably were never trained in oratory. They probably didn't know how to speak to a crowd. They probably didn't know how to minister to people. Why did God pick these people out? They were just ordinary men. Just ordinary men. They were followed in the trade that their father had done before them. They were just like any other Israelite of that time. But why did God call these guys? There was nothing unique, nothing special about them. The resume wasn't long, it was brief, they could fish, and that was it. They were night owls. They fished all night, and during the day they slept. So, they didn't really socialize with people. They didn't know what they were doing as much. But Jesus chose them. And then we look at Matthew. Matthew was a tax collector. That is a strike against him. He just wasn't an ordinary man. He wasn't just a common man. He was a bad man. Matthew collected taxes from the people. Okay? He's like an IRS agent, except he's much worse than a New York State IRS agent. He took more than half of the people's income. Imagine that. More than half of your income going to the government. Okay? And he was taking it. It was going to the emperor, of course. It was going to the governor. It was going to the province. It was also going to Matthew. He was also taking his cut. That's how they made their money. They didn't have a set income. They took it an excess out of the tax that they had to make people pay. So that's, in my opinion, pretty bad. He was also a Jew, so technically he was betraying his people by doing this. The Jews hated the Romans who had subjected them. They had fought several wars against them. The Romans had burned pigs on their altar to Zeus. So Matthew was almost like, if we could put it in the context of today, he would have been a Nazi sympathizer, in a way. He sided with people that totally destroyed their value system, that brutally oppressed them, and were mean to them at every turn. So Matthew is viewed as a traitor, we can just take this from biblical text. The rabbis, the Sadducees, the Pharisees, they all said that about Matthew, that he was a traitor to them. They all said that about any tax collector, that tax collectors should be banned, they're worse than sinners, and they should be outcasted. So God didn't just pick out ordinary people to be his disciples, he also picked out bad people. So these guys, you think God would be going for the people that know the religious law, that have some basis to build on? Matthew probably didn't attend church. He was a tax collector, so he was excluded from the church. From the attitude that we see in the Bible towards tax collectors, he probably was not included whatsoever. So he probably didn't read his Bible, probably didn't attend church, he probably didn't give much about God, but Jesus went after him and said, "Come follow me." And he responded to that. What is it that made him respond to that? There's something inside of him that responded to that. We're going to take a look at that in a moment. But why didn't Jesus go after other people? People who had the skills. People who could have done this job better. Look at the Pharisees and the teachers of the law. Okay? They knew their Bible stuff. They had studied the Old Testament scriptures that Jesus was preaching from. They called Jesus teacher. They called him a teacher. They thought of him as a prophet at first. You see consistently throughout the scriptures, they called Jesus a teacher. So so he was respected by these people. Why didn't he call them to be his disciples? What is the difference between these fishermen and these well-trained Sadducees and Pharisees and teachers of the law that he picked the fishermen over the people with the skill sets? Why the fishermen? Well, I think apparently one way we can see this is that these religious leaders killed Jesus. They crucified him. They plotted against him. They tried to tear down his theories. They tried to tear down his hypothesis, but they couldn't refute him. But they tried to as best as they could. On the other hand, the fisherman and the tax collector, they went with Jesus whatever he went through, okay? They followed through and they committed to it. When many disciples deserted Jesus, they stayed on. When the crowds left Jesus, they stayed on. They fell too, but they came back. So that is one big difference you see between the two different parties. So when you look at them, the difference is not in their resume or in their skills or in their abilities. That's not what God is looking for. God is looking for people who are willing to follow Him. That's it. People who are willing to give up their lives. It's like when you look at them, they left there immediately. It was instant obedience. If you look at these two passages, you see that these 5 men immediately left their jobs in the middle of what they were doing. They didn't go and hand in their resignation form. They got up and they left, and they followed Jesus. For Matthew, this was particularly bad. Okay? He left the Roman government office. That is huge responsibility. Leaving that, they're not going to hire him back. They don't want him in a position again. But neither do the Jews either. Okay? When he left, he was saying goodbye to everything else. Okay? If this Jesus guy didn't come through for him, there would have been nada, nothing. So he saw something so powerful that he gave up all of his security. All of it. And the fishermen, how do you think they would have felt? Like they left their fathers. They left their fellow fishermen. They left them all in a lurch. And they went off to be with Jesus. Do you think they would have been accepted back? They left their livelihood to follow Jesus. There was no certainty of money or anything. There was no highfalutinous. They just left everything for Jesus. Immediately, instantaneously. They didn't go and pray about this. When Jesus called them directly and clearly to be His disciples, they answered that. It's about where your heart is at. Are you willing to let God take control of your life? Are you willing to lay that down and sacrifice to Him? That is what I see in the call of the disciples. That is what I see what Jesus was looking for. When we look at David, king over all Israel, who united the kingdom, had it ruled under him, dynasty, Jesus was born under his line, God was highly pleased with him and favored with him. What was it? Where did he begin from? He began as a shepherd. He was a shepherd boy, the least in his family. But God took him because he was willing and he had a heart after God and did the difficult things. That is what these fishermen did. And look at this. John, a fisherman, wrote the gospel book of John. Peter became the cornerstone of the church. These guys were just ordinary, unschooled, untaught fishermen. What do you think God can do with us? He can take us wherever we are and lift us to His position. Before I close, I just want to talk over one quick passage. It's also it's in the passage of Matthew. When the Pharisees saw him keeping this kind of company with the sinners and the tax collectors, they had a fit. That was from the Message. And then to Jesus' followers. What kind of example is this from your teacher, acting cozy with crooks and riffraff? Jesus, overhearing, shot back, who needs a doctor? The healthy or the sick? Go figure out what this scripture means. I'm after mercy, not religion. I'm to invite outsiders, not coddle insiders. Jesus came on this earth to look after the lost, to look after people who weren't on the inside of things. He wasn't going to tell the goody-goody people that they were doing good, because they weren't. Nobody was doing right. Everybody was lost. But these people knew they were lost, and these people wanted to be found. And when they saw the source of the light, they chased after it with all they had, all that was required of them. They went at it full throttle. And that's my point. The call of the disciple is this. Is your heart willing? Are you willing to let go of everything and submit it all to God? To give up your life completely and let Him take it and transform it. These zeros went to heroes because they let God take control of their life. If they hadn't stepped out of that zone, if they hadn't taken that level of commitment, they would have been fishermen and tax collectors for the rest of their lives. Sure, it would have been safe, but would they have been content? Would they have been happy with their life? I think when we see Jesus ascended, we only see 120 disciples that had left from Jerusalem. 120 people. That's all that Jesus left. It's an amazingly small number. But these people had been through the firestorm. These people were hardened and ready. If we had 120 such people this day, the world would be turned upside down again as it was in that day. We need hearts after our own God. We need to follow Him completely and utterly. And that's my message.